James, and today we're going to be starting kind of a new direction, a new show. And what we're going to be doing is talking about your self image. And I'm going to start with talking a little bit about my own personal history, talking about my childhood, growing up with ADHD, and how it affected my self image growing up. And I thought I would just start here and share more of my story, some things I've never shared publicly before. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, if you've watched our channel for a while, if you've watched some of our videos on TikTok, you may have heard some of it. So, I was diagnosed with ADHD in like second grade, but I was literally given no education about ADHD. So, my perception of growing up ADHD now is totally different than it was even 2 or 3 years ago because I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 to 3 years learning a lot about ADHD. And yes, I started by watching TikToks and other people, but then I started taking the resources they were sharing and researching and researching. And that's one of the things that I'm focused on a lot in my life right now is, trying to research these things and share some of what I'm trying to learn and sharing my own perspective on a lot of these things. So, for those who may not know, ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I was diagnosed as a child. I grew up on Ritalin, which is a pill that they give. Um, they don't use it as much now. I think they have other medications. But in the 80s, when I grew up, that was like the main treatment for ADHD was here, take this Ritalin. The problem is it was here, take this Ritalin, and it's going to fix your problem. And then that's it. Nothing else. And granted, some of it is they know more now about ADHD than they did in the 80s, but basically it would help me focus and direct my focus more, but it didn't make me focus. I still had to do my part, and I wasn't taught the skills to do that once they put me on Ritalin. I was just said, here, take this pill and it fixes the problem. I was not taught the skills on how to do that. And like one of the things I was just mentioning is doing a lot of research, but I suck at doing research because researching things, and it's funny because I keep hearing on a lot of people, oh, ADHD people are great at doing research. And they probably are, and I probably will be once I develop the skill set. But I don't have the skill set to be good at researching things. I never learned that skill set. Nobody ever taught me how to research things. I was just expected to know how to do it. So I try to do research, and I mean, Google helps, but you can't always trust what you find on Google. So sometimes, and for me, like one of the big problems with ADHD for me is I get down a rabbit hole and I start going down this rabbit hole of researching something, and then all of a sudden I'm on like 10 different tangents and I've got like 100 different browser windows open and I don't even remember what I started looking for. Growing up, okay, I was given a pill, and as long as I would sit in class and not cause a disruption, that was controlling my ADHD to everybody else. They didn't care that I was struggling in every single class. They didn't care that I was failing in classes or barely passing if I did. And it wasn't for a lack of comprehension, it was just getting me to do the work half the time. Like, I hardly ever did homework. Hardly ever throughout my entire school did I ever do my homework. And sometimes I failed classes because my homework was enough of a percentage of the grade to cause me to fail. And sometimes I could do well enough on the test to compensate for the lack of homework assignments being turned in. But not always. It didn't always work out that way. I've been one of the ones that you sometimes hear people talking about, oh, you're not living up to your potential. And that's true in a lot of ways. I haven't lived up to, quote, my potential in a lot of areas in my life. And I've heard this statistic. This is part of where I've been trying to do some research. I've been hearing the statistic passed around a lot, and nobody's quoted a source for this information. And I have been searching for a source of this information and gone down 100 other rabbit holes in the attempt of searching for the source. But I've heard that people with ADHD receive more than 20,000 more negative feedback comments growing up than a normal person. Now, I do not know the accuracy of this because I could not find the source of that quote, but I'm hearing a lot of people passing around that quote. And when I'm focusing on self image, your self esteem, if you are inundated, especially as a very small child, because most of your self image is dictated by feedback you get from other people. And so, if most of the feedback you're getting from other people is negative feedback, it's about how horrible you are. It's about how you're not living up to your potential. About how you're not good enough to do this. How you just don't understand or you just don't get it. This creates this negative self image and this negative self worth. So if you ever watch, some of these old TV shows like, Steve Urkel and some of those old high school type TV shows, I have flashbacks watching those shows because I was the nerdy, shy, quiet kid that got beat up all the time, that got stuffed into the lockers. That was me. I was one distracted and ADHD. Even with Ritalin, it helped, but it didn't take it away. I was not the smartest person in the class. I was not athletic. I was small for my age. I didn't actually grow into my size until I was in my 20s. When I graduated high school, I had a baby face, so I looked younger than everybody else. I was the smallest kid in the class most of the time, and that left me open to bullying. And then I was also raised in a very strict household, and I was taught growing up that if somebody is picking on you or fighting you or whatever, you do not fight back, otherwise you're going to get just as much trouble as they do. So I never defended myself. I was taught from a childhood not to stand up for myself and not to advocate for myself ever in any capacity. And if I tried to do it at home, I would get in more trouble. If I tried to do it at school, I would get in more trouble. So everywhere I went, I was inundated with this. The other day, I was like, saw that I had missed a call from a family member that I hadn't talked to in months. And it's not that I didn't care about them. I was like, oh, shoot, I haven't talked to them in a long time. They're not on social media, so that I don't see them there. And if I didn't see them, I didn't think about them. And it's not that I didn't care about them and I didn't care about what they're going through, but, I don't think about people that are not present in my life. So I see people on social media, oh, how are they doing? I'll check in and see, at least get to know, based on what they're posting on social media, which you can't always trust anyway. Because let's put it, most people anyway post their best moments on social media. They don't post their worst moments. They post their best moments. They don't post everything that's, or you get a lot of people that only post how horrible everything is. It's like there's no middle ground of saying, this is, the overall of where things are at. And I don't post that much on social media. Most of it's whenever I'm, posting is because I have something that I want to share. I don't post just everyday stuff on social media for the most part, except for like last week when I stabbed myself in the hand. I did post that around because, it just made me think of the past and my clumsiness and past mistakes. And I had a nickname. For people that saw some of my social media posts may know this. I had a nickname in my, I don't know, I was 18 or 19 years old. I stabbed myself in the stomach with a knife. Long story. Unintentionally. It was an accident. But I earned myself with my friends group at the time the name Stabs Himself. And they called me that for years, and some of them still do now, and that was over 20 years ago. And so when I posted that on social media, I was like, yeah, stabs himself, strikes again. I stabbed myself in the hand. I didn't intentionally do it. It was a knife falling off the counter, and I tried to catch it. I have never intentionally stabbed myself that way. I have intentionally cut myself. That's a whole nother story. But I have never intentionally stabbed myself. One of the things that I've been learning a lot about ADHD is auditory processing disorders are very common. You ever hear the old Charlie Brown cartoons, and every time the adults are talking, that's the way they sound in Charlie Brown, right? A lot of times, that's literally what I hear when people are talking to me. I do not hear the words that are coming out of your mouth. All I hear is wow, 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 wow. And my brain does not process what you said. So I may ask, and this pisses people off. And this is part of the problem. I was berated for asking people to repeat themselves so much when I was younger that I stopped doing it. And I would just acquiesce and go along with whatever they said. And like, if it's important, it'll come up later. Because if I ask, I get berated. This was part of that self image and that low self esteem that was already building. Sometimes people will talk to me. I might as well just be listening to that teacher in Charlie Brown because that's all I heard. And then we also have the working memory issues. So you might tell me something. I might agree with you. I might even be all on board with it. And 5 minutes later, I don't even remember the conversation ever happened because it didn't sink into my long-term memory. It didn't stay in my get deep enough into my working memory, especially if you're inundating me when I'm in the middle of something else. Like if I'm working or if I'm in the middle of a game or I'm doing something and you come and talk to me, and this is all part of the ADHD. But it's also, this is stuff that I berate myself for. I beat myself up for this stuff to this day, even though I'm getting better at it. I'm better at it now than I used to be, which is one of those big mottos in my life is I'm not perfect, but I'm better now than I used to be. This is something that has been a huge inflection in my life is I don't remember things. People want to know, oh, what happened like recently, I played Final Fantasy 14 and I lost my account because I lost my phone and I had a two-factor authentication thing on my phone for them. And because I didn't disable that two-factor authentication, I couldn't recover my account. And when I talked to their customer service, they wanted to know the exact date I started my account. And they wanted to know all these details about when I started my account. Well, that was 20 years ago. I started my account with them in like 2003. So I do not remember what date in 2003. I remember it was 2003 only because the game I set up my account with them for came out in 2003. And I was playing this game with a bunch of friends. So I know it was 2003. And I cannot tell you the date I started that account. I could not tell you what phone number I had in 2003 when I started that account. I barely remember the address that I had in 2003. And the thing is I actually moved in 2003. So do I remember, was it before I moved or after I moved? Which address would it have been when I started my account? I moved that year. I know that because that was when my ex-wife and I bought our first house was during that year. And I don't remember exactly when we moved and when we started playing the game and started. I don't remember. It was all around the same time. So I don't know which address to give you. So, this was, and this is something that's been going on since my childhood. People want to know, oh, well, tell us the stories of your childhood. I can't tell you many of them. And most of the ones I do remember, I do tell sometimes when I want to make a point, but I try not to dwell on them because they're not very good. Because one of the things I have found with the working memory problem is that there's got to be one of two things that lodge something into your memory. It has to be repetitive or it has to be emotionally intense. And I think this works for everybody to some degree, but with ADHD people especially, it's essential. The emotional intensity, this is why we remember traumas like it happened yesterday, but we can't remember day-to-day stuff because it was in emotionally intense situations, which most of the emotionally intense situations I went through as a child were traumatic. So most of my memories of my childhood are the traumas I went through. And it's probably the most emotionally intense negatives because that's what it takes to lodge it into our memories is emotional intensity. The more stressful and intense the situation is, the more you're going to remember it. And I have things that I remember from my past that were maybe somewhat incidental things, but because of other things that were emotionally intense going on, they lodged into my mind. Um, and they're very kind of key moments for me and those core memories for me. But at the same time, even looking at pictures, I can be like, yeah, I remember we did that, but I don't remember the. Like, we were looking through some family photos. We found some family photos in storage a few months ago. We were looking through them, and we found some pictures of the one and only family vacation I remember ever taking. Now, I'm not saying we never went on vacation. This is the only vacation I ever remember, is because we went across the country. Um, and I don't remember. I think I was 6 or 7 at the time. I was really young, but we went to Yellowstone National Park and we went to Mount Rushmore and we went to several of these, like, naturalistic attractions and stuff. And I remember that trip. I don't remember a lot of details about that trip, but it's the only vacation I remember ever taking that was actually, quote, a vacation, not like we would go to scout camp. So we would go, we got involved in Boy Scouts. And once we got into Boy Scouts, that kind of became our life until after I graduated high school. Because I was involved in Scouts. My parents were involved in adult leader training. So if we weren't doing something with the Boy Scout troop. We were doing something with adult leader training, or we were doing something with Order of the Arrow. But we were doing something with Boy Scouts almost every weekend from like the time I was like 13 years old till the time I was 18. Every summer I spent 4 months every summer working at the scout camp, or 3 months every summer working at the scout camp. Usually June, July, and August, or beginning of August, I would be at scout camp. And I would work at the scout camp as a staff member. Um, Back, I don't know if you're still here, but Changeling DJ, who's in the chat, that's how he and I met. We were both on staff at scout camp. But I was constantly inundated at school with all this negative feedback from people. And maybe to me it was worse than it actually was, too. I will admit this, because I don't remember the good parts. So there might have been a lot more good parts than bad parts, and I just don't remember the good ones. Um, and I do remember that there were people that were, friends, and some of them are still friends to this day. I mean, my ex-wife and I met in elementary school. My wife now, Jessica, was best friends with my ex-wife in junior high and high school, and she and I knew each other in junior high. I have several friends that are people that I, at least somewhat stay in touch with, that I met through school. But most of that too was like from elementary school through junior high, which was ninth grade. We lived in San Angelo, Texas, which is, that's where we kind of grew up. And then my dad's job moved us to the Dallas Fort Worth area when I was in ninth grade. So he was already living in Dallas, and we moved in after the end of the school year. We moved up to Dallas. And so then 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade, um, I went to three different high schools. So I went to three different high schools for my 3 years in high school once we moved up to Dallas. And I didn't really develop good friendships and relationships with people. I have more relationships with people I met through Boy Scouts, because we all did Boy Scout stuff together, no matter where we lived in the Dallas area. But as far as school, I didn't really develop very good relationships with people in school. Part of it is, again, by that point, I was already shy and reticent, so I didn't outgo and make friends very well. I was all over the place. I had zero support system for my ADHD, even though I didn't even really know that 90% of the problems I was having was because of my ADHD. I had zero support system in place. I had nobody looking out for me. As long as I wasn't disrupting class, they didn't care whether I succeeded or failed, as long as I wasn't disrupting other people from succeeding. One of the big areas I had a problem with, even with scouts, was, one of those points of the scout law is a scout is clean, and I always had problems with that one. And DJ will remember this. My tent was always the messiest tent in the scout camp. It was horrible. And it's not intentional. It's just I struggle with cleaning and organization. It's something I fight with myself on every single day. And my house is that way still. I'm still a mess. It doesn't help that I was raised by a hoarder who may or may not have been neurodivergent herself and just undiagnosed. I don't know. I know she had a lot of other issues, but she also was a hoarder, literally. And so didn't develop the skills on how to do those kind of things. I was just expected to know them. And that's one of the things I have found that is a repetitive cycle in my entire life. In school, how to study, how to do research, how to do all these things. These are things I was supposed to be learning in school, and yet in my case, I was just assumed I already knew how to do all that stuff. Maybe it's because of changing schools as often as I did. They assumed I already knew how to do it from other schools, and I didn't. So I never was taught how to research things. I was expected to do research papers, but nobody ever taught me how to do research. I was expected to do presentations that were research presentations. I had a speech class. I flat out failed because I refused to ever stand up in front of the class and talk. I never once, I went through a whole year of a speech class and never once got up and gave a speech in front of the class. And part of it was because a lot of the people that were in those classmates were people that were constantly making fun of me. I had other classes with some of them, and as soon as we would come into the class, and I even had days that I kind of had a speech prepared, a speech in mind for whatever our topic for the day was. But I would not. And the fact that this is why, I think it's crazy that I'm out here, doing YouTube videos, doing TikTok videos, doing podcasts. And I've been doing this for like 14 years now, in different forms and trying to find something to stick with. But one of the things that I found was, I actually enjoy public speaking. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy communicating with people through my words, but I didn't learn that back then. All I knew was, and this was, Adrian said it in the chart, is RSD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. When you have everybody picking on you and making fun of you, and you have RSD, and I've always wondered the chicken and the egg on that. Does RSD cause you not wanting to get up in front of talking to people, or do you have RSD because everybody picked on you? Or, does it cause you to behave in a way that causes more people to want to pick on you? Which one kind of comes first? For me, I don't know which one started it, because as far back as I can remember, they've both been there. We also have imposter syndrome. So I always feel like I'm fake. That's one of the reasons I'll start doing a new YouTube channel, and I'll start doing it, and I'll do good for a few months, and then all of a sudden I'll quit and I'll disappear, because that imposter syndrome, especially when I start getting some momentum and I start seeing some positive feedback and some reinforcement, that imposter syndrome kicks in, and I feel like I'm being fake. And I feel like, oh, they're going to see right through me. They're going to see that I'm not this expert, that I'm not perfect, and that I'm not a professional, or that I'm not all these things that I expect myself to be. And, I'm trying to learn to be easier on myself with that, but it's really, really hard. It's one of the things I want to talk to my doctor about. Because of neurodivergence, we have trouble holding our emotions together. We already often have strong emotions. I think we can be innate or developed. Yeah, it can be. I think it's a mixture of two. These are some questions I want to ask my doctor when I go to see them in a couple of weeks. Is the rejection sensitivity? Do I have rejection sensitivity because I was so picked on, or do I just realize that I was picked on because of my rejection sensitivity? And part of the reason why I come to that is because I also know, because I have other friends and people that have been a part of my life for, several years, that I met after high school or met during high school and became friends after high school, that they pick on me, but they also will be very upfront. If I don't pick on you, it's because I don't like you. and they're like, if I wouldn't pick on you if I didn't like you, kind of thing. And I don't know that there wasn't some of that going on in elementary school and junior high and high school, and I just didn't recognize it. I just saw somebody picking on me. But then the part that a lot of people don't know is I got all this stuff at school, right? So we had all this stuff. I was the kid that was picked on, I was beat up. And then I would go home and I was picked on and I was beat up. I did not wear shorts until I was in my 30s, and part of that was because I grew up knowing that if I wore shorts, people would see the bruises. And that's not something that a lot of people know. I've mentioned having an abusive stepmother, but I've never really talked about the specifics of the abuse. There were times I could not wear shorts. I could not wear um, sleeveless shirts or long sleeve shirts because if I did, people would see the bruises. And I did not wear shorts and short sleeves until I was almost in my 30s. I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I started finally wearing shorts. It was hard. It was hard hiding that because this is part of where the imposter syndrome too. I was, talking. One of the things we do as ADHD people is we mask. Well, guess what? When you're in an abusive situation at home, you learn to wear a mask, and I learned to mask really, really well. I learned to hide what was going on at home. I never talked about what was going on. I never had friends over to my house. Never once in my life did I have friends come over to my house because I never knew when she was going to go off and start swinging. And then it wasn't just a physical. There was also a lot of verbal. I was told, in fact, I laugh about it now, but I was told growing up, pretty much my entire life up until after I moved out, that I would be dead or in jail by the time I was 20. So when I went to work, when I was 35 and I went to work at the prison, one of the first things I did, because at that point I wasn't in my healed state with my stepmother at that point, but I was beginning to work on that healing of that relationship, healing myself, healing the trauma, and getting through some of that. And so she and I were in connection at that point. And so I sent her a text message that says, well, you finally get your wish. I'm going to prison on Monday. And her reaction was, what did you do? And I said, I got hired there. I'm going to be a security officer. And she kind of got mad at me for how I informed her of such a decision. Now, that was one of the worst experiences of my life, too. It was great. See, this is one of the things, too, with ADHD people. School was somewhat structured, but not structured in a way that benefited me as an ADHD person. I've heard a lot that the military is. I can tell you, working in a prison, working in that environment, it's a very, very mentally and emotionally toxic environment. And for that, I say it was one of the worst jobs that I ever had. On the other hand, I think part of the reason why I worked there for 6 years and I was able to stay in that environment for 6 years, no matter how toxic it was, one, I was able to somewhat separate from the toxicity mentally, not completely. And I'm still working on healing some of that in my own life now. And it's been 3 years since I've worked there. But it gave me something that I hated, but I needed, which is structure. It is a very structured, very much, these are the policies and procedures you have to follow. And a lot of it wasn't even the company we worked for because they had state guidelines we had to follow. But it gave me a very structured system. And that was helpful for me with staying on task, on target, getting the job done. And there was enough variety within the structure that I didn't get bored. There was always something weird going on or some new thing going on. But it happened within this structured systems and processes that allowed us to navigate the chaos in a structured way. And that was really, really helpful. And one of the big problems I've had, like with my YouTube growth, with my reselling business, I don't have that structure. When I went to work for myself and I left working at the prison, one of the big downfalls that's caused me to struggle in that is I don't have that structure in place. And trying to figure out how to create that structure, because I know it. This is again where ADHD people sometimes know things, but we don't know how to implement it. Figuring out how to create that structure is one of the things that I have ripped my hairs out over for 3 years. I talked about the rejection sensitivity. I talked about these things. All of these things kind of culminated into me being low self worth. I was worthless. I had this deep seated belief in myself of how worthless I was and how I was never going to amount to anything and I couldn't do anything. On top of that, when I was 19, I hadn't really, I don't remember, and I know I had to have because of how controlled it is, but I don't remember ever going to see the doctor after we left San Angelo, which was like when I was 14, until after I graduated high school when I was 19 or when I was 18. But the Ritalin kept coming, so I had to have seen the doctor, I would think, but I don't remember seeing the doctor. But I got zero support other than here's your prescription of Ritalin until I was 19, and all of a sudden the Ritalin ran out. And then there was, I wasn't going to see the doctor, I guess, so they weren't refilling my prescription. So I ran out of Ritalin. At the time, I was also deconstructing my religious ideologies, and I had recognized the fallacies of most everything in there. And I was in a really bad place in my relationship with my stepmom, and I was trying to get out of that situation. And I was working, and I was failing at school, and I was struggling at work, and the Ritalin ran out. And so at that time, when I was 19, I went into a super depressive state, and this was probably around September of 2019. Or, no, not, I was 19. So it was September, October of 1995. And when all that stuff was hitting all at once, I felt really depressed. I felt down, and I was at the lowest point in my life. Um, and I attempted suicide, and I did try to cut my wrists. And luckily, I failed. I'm still here. But luckily, some people that knew me at the time recognized something was going on, and they got me help. And they got me help on multiple levels. And they got me out of the situation I was in my house. And they got me into a spiritual community that was non-religious and started teaching me how to survive outside of the context of being where I was at. Now, they did not understand ADHD, and there was a lot of struggles that we had later. Then I now know that a lot of the struggles that we had in that relationship were because of my ADHD, and they didn't understand ADHD either. Um, but, there was some people that reached out and helped me to save my life. I was 19 years old. And that then took me the next 10 years of my life was spent deep in understanding spirituality, self-help, personal development. That's really what started me on the path to where I'm at right now. That's what started me on the path of studying psychology, spirituality, philosophy, all of the things that I could study to help me to try to understand why I was failing at everything and why I felt so bad about myself. And that's where I'm at today. That's what led me up to that. And so when I was about 19 years old is when this journey started. And now I'm 48. I'm fixing to turn 48 technically. I'm 47 and, 89%. I'm going to be turning 48 next month. But, so it's been almost a 20-year journey of learning, growing, healing. And it's not linear. It's like up and down. Make some steps forward, take some steps back, go sideways. Let's take a different tangent path. Let's try something else that's not. This path isn't quite working for me. I like these things about it, but these are things that I don't like about it. Let's take a totally different direction. And that's the way my life has been for most of the last 20 years. I'm constantly going here and there in that way. I've studied everything from philosophy. I study Hermeticism, Hermetic philosophy, Stoicism. I love Ryan Holiday, which, if you know who Ryan Holiday is, he is kind of a modern day Stoic philosopher. He teaches a lot about the teachings of the Stoics, which were from Plato, Socrates, that era, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, a lot of those philosophies. But Ryan Holiday, the reason I bring him up is I live like 30 minutes from where his bookstore is. It's like a 30-minute drive from my house to his bookstore. And I didn't even know who he was until I started finding him on TikTok and YouTube and started seeing him all over the place. But I've read some of his books now, and following some of the Stoic philosophies. I like a lot of the Stoic philosophies because the Stoic philosophies are not about the external world, and it's not about what's going on outside of you. It's about what's going on inside of you, and that jives with me. That's where a lot of my ideas come from. I think we have the external world, and I think some people play too much to the extremes, and like when it comes to should we work internally or externally to solve societal issues. I think that there's a lot of societal issues that need to change and that are are hurting people. At the same time, I think a lot of people are using societal issues as an excuse to deny responsibility for not doing their own internal work and taking responsibility for what's going on inside of them. And you see this all over, and especially in the extremisms, you see it on the content people post all over social media. They're blaming everybody else for their problems and not taking any accountability for their own. And I think that there's some of both. I think there's external factors that are causing problems in my life. But there's also, I think, the larger portion of it for me is the internal stuff. What are my belief systems, and how is what's going on sociologically contrasting or working with what's going on socially in the world? And I think this is a huge part of finding our authenticity, is finding that balance and that harmony. One of the things I have been preaching for years that some people just don't seem to get is let's get away from this extremes on almost every ideology. This includes political, this includes religious, this includes everything. Get away from the extremisms and find the censuses, find the harmony and the balance points. Because in my life, in my opinion, that's where I have found the most peace, the most balance, the best version of myself has been when I find the harmony and the balance between what's going on externally and what's going on internally, between, good versus evil. The more I contemplate this stuff, the less I believe good and evil actually exists. Because the problem with good and evil is completely subjective. Because what you think is good and evil may be the exact opposite of what I think is good and evil. It's a completely subjective experience. And guess where your subjective experiences are formed? Internally. It's based on your beliefs. Now, a lot of that internal belief systems came from external experiences, which is why we need to work on societal changes. We need to work on these things externally as well. But we've got to work on the inside so that we can figure out, why do I believe this? Where does this belief come from? Where does this behavior come from? What is going on inside of me that's causing me to behave this way? And is it something I control, or is it something out of my control? And there's a lot, when we have ADHD, there's a lot of it we can't control more than most people. There's a lot of things that we even do ourselves that we can't control. But some of that is coming from the rejection sensitivity. Some of it's coming from, one of the things that we have is emotional dysregulation. We do not have the ability to regulate our emotions the way normal people do. And when I learned about this, I was like, I can show myself a lot of grace for the first time in my life because I have been emotionally dysregulated, but I learned to mask it. In fact, I remember one time I was on a trip with a friend of mine. I don't know, it was around that same time. I was 19, 20, um, and it was one of the friends that helped get me out of the bad situation. We were driving somewhere, and I was getting really upset because there were some things that were coming at me, and I felt like I was under an attack. And looking back on it, reflecting on it, some of what she was saying was right. And I don't even remember the exact conversation, but I do remember kind of the general idea of what we were talking about. But then she was like, you need to put your shield down. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? And she said, your eyes are glazed over and it's like there's nobody there. Well, I was at that moment starting to get emotionally dysregulated, and I was fighting with every fiber of my being not to blow up because I knew she didn't deserve the blow up that my brain was trying to tell me, my emotions were trying to tell me she deserved and she needed. But I knew somewhere inside myself that it wasn't warranted, and she was trying to help me, and so I had this kind of thing going on inside my head. And so I have this mask that goes up to keep my emotional dysregulation from blowing out and especially hurting people. As one of the things I have found is over the last few years, as I've started doing the unmasking work and coming out of that masking behavior and the toxic masking behavior, that masking is also no longer in place. And so people see a side of me that they don't like to see. And I'm often accused of being, some very not nice things because when my initial regulation, that mask that I always used to hide my emotional dysregulation is no longer there. And so it blows up at people and it blows out at people and it hurts people. And that's one of the things I got to talk to the doctor about because I'm like, I have got to stop this emotional dysregulation, but I know it's also a part of the ADHD I have to accept. But at the same time, I've got to get that somehow under control where I don't like destroy every single relationship that I have with people because of my emotional dysregulation. There's a lot of things in my life that caused me to have really low self esteem up until I was in my 20s, 30s. And that low self esteem did not just go away because I had all these realizations either. Oh, yeah. Well, whenever I blow up, and see, this is part of the problem because, again, this is going back to I was taught to never stand up for myself. So now when I try to stand up for myself, it usually turns out very badly because I wind up blowing up. Because when I do try to assert myself, I do try to stand up for myself, all that dysregulated emotion starts coming out that I have kept hidden from the world for 40 years. And usually the whoever is pushing the buttons is the one that winds up getting the brunt of that. And now that I have kids, it's really, I'm constantly having to fight myself with my kids not to blow up on them. And some days I win and some days I fail at that. Because I know they don't deserve my emotional dysregulation, but they push my buttons too, like daily. And I love my kids. And I don't want to say or do anything that scars them or traumatizes them or hurts them. But at the same time, when you have emotional dysregulation and they push the right buttons, you don't know what's going to come out your mouth and how it's going to be directed. And I'm trying to. Luckily, I can say that everything I have done has been not necessarily, and it's not to excuse my actions in any way. It's been verbal. I have never gotten physically dysregulated in a way that's physically harmful to people. I have kept, sometimes just taking every bit of everything I've got to lock that part down because I have times I want to start swinging, but I lock that shit down and I do not allow that part out. I've never let that part out. I could sit here and logically tell you how wrong it is and how I've been wrong with it, and I do try to let them know, I was wrong in doing this. That's what people don't get. Emotional dysregulation is not just about having emotions. Literally, the dysregulation, I do not have the ability to stop it from coming out. Once it starts coming out, it's coming out, even if I know it's wrong. I am not in control at that point. And I don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes I have to fight everything I've got to at least lock down the physical point that wants to just start swinging or throwing things. Because every time I get into an argument, I can tell you this, every time I have ever been in an argument with anybody, my arguments, you only see the outward side where I'm arguing with you. You do not see the part of me that is completely arguing and fighting inside myself. Because if I'm fighting somebody externally, I'm also fighting myself internally at the same time. And I don't know if that's normal with the emotional dysregulation. Is that the ADHD? Is that just normal human behavior? I've never really found a clear answer. I've seen a lot of opinions that kind of go all over the place. I don't know. But I know for me, whenever I'm expressing negative emotions towards other people, I've also got an internal dialogue and an internal battle going on within myself, and I am fighting myself to gain back that control. So that's something that's within me, and we're going to discuss that probably at another time. I have been going for a while now. One of the things that I want to kind of get at, and I've kind of been on a ramble, and I kind of didn't even get into everything I wanted to because I was responding to the chat. But growing up, having ADHD did not necessarily serve me well, and I struggled with believing in myself, and I still do to this day. I struggle with the imposter syndrome. And I can tell you, I've been struggling with imposter syndrome since at least first or second grade. I mean, we're talking, little. I was, Jesse's age or older. A classroom setting is not a structure that fits with my brain. Does not work with my brain, which is part of why I dropped out of school and never went back. When I dropped out of college and I never went back, I but that doesn't mean I'm uneducated. Actually, I have done way more and better educating on myself, doing reading books. One of my favorite tools in my arsenal is my public library card because I haven't always been able to buy programs and buy books, but I can always go to the library and check stuff out. And I guarantee you, even if you have, I live in a small town with a crappy library. But I guarantee you, pretty much whatever topic I want to do some research on or do some studying about, I can find at least 2 or 3 books on that topic in the library. And, granted, you're going to, limited perceptions and experiences with that. The bigger the libraries you can get to, the more options you have and different resources you can look at and different expressions. But I can also read stuff and pick up patterns. I can see, and especially in areas I've already worked in my own life, when I've worked on certain patterns in my own life, I can recognize those patterns in other people. And this is where a lot of people get mad at me sometimes, and this is where sometimes I get into matches with people in my personal life where I will see a behavior pattern in somebody. And I know the cause of that behavior pattern because I have seen it and I have experienced it and I have worked my way through it. I know the mental and the emotional things that go inside that cause that behavior pattern. And sometimes, if we want to change a pattern of behavior, we need to find the root cause of the behavior. And it's usually something psychological. It's usually something in your paradigm about the world. It's something in your subconscious programming. And 90% of our lives are lived based off of a subconscious program. This is below consciousness. For a reason, it's called subconscious. And so this has been kind of one of the key areas of my study over the last 30 years is understanding the subconscious mind, understanding human behavior patterns, understanding. And I've looked at everything from personal development, coaching, behavior transformational therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, all kinds of different psychology. I've been studying almost anything I could get my hands on that helped me to understand myself for 30 years. Spirituality, um, higher consciousness, metaphysics. I even study weird things like astrology, and a lot of people think, oh, well, that's all hokey stuff. I thought it was too until I started studying it, and I started realizing, well, the reason why it's hokey is because people pay lip service to it, and they only look at the surface level stuff. They don't look at the deeper meaning of it. And there's combinations of ADHD and autism. That's actually one of the things I want to talk to my doctor about, because the more I studied and looked into in the last 2 years, ADHD has been one of the big areas of focus. And as I do that, of course, there's a lot of blending between ADHD and autism. There's a lot of what they're now calling ADHD, which is autistic and ADHD in a comorbidity, which is more and more being found extremely common. I think the last statistics I said was probably 40% of the people with ADHD also have some form of autism. And that's still because they're very conservative in those estimates because it's still very newly being researched. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at 40%. You're getting really close to half the people with ADHD also have some form of autism. So I am pretty sure that I have some of the autistic traits, but I've never had an autistic diagnosis, and I'm not claiming autism. That's one of the things on my list of things to talk to my doctor about. Is possible assessments, possible, looking at it. And the other side of this is with as much trauma as I went through and as much bullshit as I've got in my life, there's a lot of things that can look like autism that can also be trauma response. So this is something I really need to talk to my doctor about. I'm not claiming autism, but I see some similarities in myself and a lot of the ADHD community. I see the signs that it's possible, but I don't know yet. I haven't done an evaluation. But one of my things is trying to create the systems, trying to figure out systems and tools that will work for me to help me control my ADHD, control my symptoms, and live with it in a way that I'm not failing at pretty much everything, which is pretty much the majority of my life. I have spent so much time, and I try to be optimistic. I try to be realistically optimistic, though. I'm looking at it realistically, knowing that I'm in a really bad place right now, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically. I'm not in the best place. I'm not in the best shape. I still smoke. I still haven't quit smoking yet. I've been talking about quitting smoking for about the last 10 years, and I still haven't successfully done it. I cut back and then I get back on it because I am using caffeine and nicotine right now to stimulate my brain to keep me functioning at some level of human decency. I'm hoping if they can get me on maybe the proper medication, which with the medication shortages that have been going on, they may not even be able to do that even if they want to. They may not be able to get me the meds that I need. Because that's a whole nother story and a whole nother ballgame. I know a lot of ADHD people for about the last 2 years have been having trouble getting their meds. And so even if they do prescribe me medications, can I get them? But hopefully if I can get on the right medications, possibly I can get control of the smoking and get that quit and get the caffeine under control. because right now caffeine and nicotine are basically the only things that keep me somewhat functioning in society right now. And I don't function in society very often or very well, by the way. For most of the last 3 years since I left working at the prison in 2019, I have been a hermit. I do not go out unless I have to. Now, some of that is because of me and my social anxiety, which again comes back to the ADHD. Um, I don't like being around people. I never have. And I've kind of been acknowledging that more in the last 2 or 3 years. I love people, but I can't stand being around people, which is another conundrum. It's another one of those really kind of contradictory things in my life that I recognize and I acknowledge. I love people, I care about people, but I can't stand being around people and having to interact with them. But that's one of the things that has I'm trying to learn how to get under control. That's one of the things that I'm trying to learn how to manage, and hopefully the doctors will help me be able to do that. Hopefully they'll help me give me tools and resources. And it may just all be a flop. They may just look at me and say, "Yeah, suck it up and deal with it. Go on and live your life." I don't know. I've got an appointment to talk to them. I think it's in 2 weeks. It's sometime this month. I'll have to go look it up and see if I can remember when my appointment is. Hopefully I don't miss it. But it's been a long journey, and I'm hoping to get some things under control. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is we are putting together this idea and this podcast and this thing is sharing our personal experiences as I'm starting to learn how to do some of the research, doing some research and doing some more research stuff. I want to do some interviews with other creators and other, mental health professionals and other people to talk about how do we build a better self-image? How do we help other people get a better self-image? And that's all kind of some stuff that I'm planning. I got to figure out how to contact people and schedule these, how to set up the interviews, how to conduct the interviews. There's a lot of this I've never done before. So it's a whole new style of content. I'm also thinking I'm going to probably do some reaction type content. That seems to be really popular right now, where I'm going to be watching some of these videos on TikTok and and sharing my opinions and my experiences with the things that they're talking about. And even like I was talking about how a lot of what you see on TikTok is people just not taking any responsibility for their own inner work. And I'm gonna actually do some videos. I've got some videos saved on your TikTok right now for doing some reaction style content where I'm going to break down, hey, this is what they're saying. Okay, this is what they're doing. This is where they're denying responsibility for their part. And like I said, I see a lot of this where a lot of people want to blame everything outside of themselves for everything that's wrong in their lives. And they're not. I'm not saying there's not some truth to their claims, but there's also the other side, and both can be true at the same time, where society has a part to play in it, but so does what you're doing internally. What is your thought process? What are your minds? What's your emotions? What are you feeling? How are you dealing with this? How are you processing what society is doing? That has as much or more impact on your success or failure at things. And like, I am sick and tired of people saying that there's no opportunities for people when I'm like in this place of knowing and seeing massive opportunities right now, no matter what your race is, no matter what your sexual orientation is, no matter what your religion is. There are more opportunities right now for anybody in the world to be successful financially, in business, in personal growth, in connecting with other people, whatever it is you're trying to succeed at. There's been never more opportunities than there are right now. And I think that that opportunity is going to grow with the expansion of technology. Yeah, I think it's going to grow. I think it's going to be better. So we are going to head out. I've been rambling on for, almost an hour and a half now for my 30-minute show. And I got derailed a few times. What my plan is, and I'm hoping to at least be able to download this and at least clip out at least a 30-minute podcast episode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these shows live stream. I'm going to download them. I'm recording them locally on my computer as well. We're going to edit it down into about a 30-minute show and release it as a podcast. It'll be released here on YouTube as a video podcast, and then we're going to be releasing the audio as a podcast on the different podcasting platforms. And you can also check out my blog, which doesn't have any content because I've revamped the whole blog again and deleted everything I had off of it. I'm working on some content. We're going to be putting the podcast episodes up there as well. JamesP001.com. You can find links to all my socials on the homepage, and we are working on some content to put together a blog over there as well and start blogging again. That's how I started with online content, was through blogging back in 2009, 2008. And, and I want to get back into it. I want to start doing some written content. We're going to be putting our videos up there. We're going to be putting some of these stuff. So that's going to be my home, my central home. That's where we're going to talk about, different opportunities and different things. And if people want to work with me, people want to, have somebody to work with me, you can contact me through JamesP001.com. I have contact forms and stuff on there where you can contact me and we can work out something to work with people one-on-one or in group settings or whatever. So I hope you're having a fantastic day. I hope that this has been not totally boring and not totally unexciting for some people. I know it's been kind of a ramble all over the place. I'm going to try to get it more structured and more organized. And we will see y'all next time. Y'all have a fantastic day. We love you.